Okay, so today we're going to talk about how we can set up a multi-brand design system in Supernova. And we're going to have a quick introduction about multi-brand. And the goal of this is to give you a tool that is complementary to what you do with Supernova, and you can utilize this FigJam as a framework to help you guide with questions you can ask your team about multi-brand and how to think about how you could structure. I also set up a example design system that you can draw some inspiration from. And there will be a live Q&A at the end. And the questions I won't be able to answer, we'll answer next week when we share the recording and the FigJam with you guys. So no worries there. Okay, so let's say this month has been dedicated inside of Supernova to talk to our customers and to learn by their experience and how has it been for them to set up a multi-brand design system with the help of Supernova. And we've identified there is essentially three types of multi-brand setups. And these three types are described here. Essentially, there's design systems that have brand elements that are shared or complementary across the different brands and different products. This is, let's say, the setup number one. The setup number two is a multi-brand design system that serves completely different brands and different audiences. And the main goal of this is essentially to create a core unification of the design language that then can be multiplied across different brands. And we've learned that these teams sometimes utilize something that is called a white label design system that they use as a core, and then they multiply the design decisions with things like Figma modes. And the third type is what I said. There's a core design system, and there's a dedicated design system team that focuses on this main design system. And then there are other product teams feed on these base design system decisions, and then the teams can build upon this. And sometimes this is called also systems of systems. And that's another setup we've seen teams do. An example is, for example, Spotify is a design system that speaks about this way of working. And this is something you can consider for your team as well. We've seen a change within Supernova when we start firstly thinking about multi-brand in our product. With the implementation of Figma variables, it has thankfully introduced a lot of functionality for designers. And last month we did the State of Design Tokens questionnaire that you can find at the bottom of the FigJam. If you want to see the results, you can check them there. But the adoption of variables was massive, and this enabled teams to be able to utilize modes like you do in code, and bring that bridge is wonderful. And so this raised a lot of questions of how teams should structure the best. And from this exercise we've been doing along the month with our customers, we learned that there's a bunch of base questions that the teams could ask themselves when they want to evolve to a multi-brand setup, or even as they are growing their design system in a multi-brand setup. And in this little area, this is an example that I created for you guys. So I think when thinking in the context of multi-brand, there's these four main areas that teams can focus on. And essentially, it's how you structure your design, the design architecture you've created. And it boils down to Figma. And as Supernova being a Figma first platform, it also, or a design first platform, it makes sense to think as this as your base. And questions you can ask your team around are, for example, how do you structure your tokens? If you utilize variable modes, and if you do, how are you going to structure them? Are you going to create a mode for each brand? And then how do you create this information architecture with the collections? And there are teams that utilize Token Studio, and as some of you that might be using Supernova know, we do have a connection to Token Studio, and that can influence your final setup, as you will learn a little bit further. And other things you can ask your team is, how are you going to structure your icon or your design system element assets? For example, do you want to have a Figma library that is for your components, and will this be per brand, or will this be all brands together? These are the things that could be interesting for you to structure, and this FigJam will enable you to think these things through with your team. And also I created here an example of answers and I mapped them to the design system types that we saw here. So this could help you also make the decision further of how you could set up your structure. Another area that is important to consider definitely is your documentation distribution. How do you imagine you should showcase the documentation for your audience? Do you think also this, I think you could think in a high-level version, a high-level view of your company. How does your company perceive the brands, and how does your teams perceive them as well? Would this make sense for your design system to have a big separation of concerns across these brands because they don't have a common design language in the example we saw above? Those are the questions to have, and Supernova enables you to do this as well, as I will show you further. And with this, of course, we cannot forget the team, the people that are going to consume the documentation and the design system elements. How will your team work if they work across a base design system? Maybe you could use certain things like scoping from Figma variables to help them, if you're utilizing modes, to help them to help them have an easier way to consume your design system Figma library, for example. And if you want these in a long-term vision, do you think your team members should be involved in the design system? If so, will you set up any contribution methods, for example, for the system? And even now, Supernova released commenting last week. So you can, for example, bring other team members as editors as well, and they can contribute to the system even more. So that's a positive. And last but not least, a very important point as well is to think about the end-to-end solution of you decide your token architecture in Figma, utilizing modes or utilizing Token Studio, or even we have teams that have separate design system styles or files for each of the brands. They don't even have a common ground like we saw. That could be a possibility. But how will this be translated into code? Will you utilize a framework like Style Dictionary? Will your engineers be okay with this, and they can help you set this up or not? And also, if you are having a system that has that needs to serve different platforms, for example, Android or iOS, how are you going to distribute these packages? Luckily, Supernova has the capability to allow you to export code, these tokens and icons, to different code languages. And this is not something we're going to cover here, but definitely we will in future enablement help you with the setup. So comment anywhere if you'd like us to discuss this as well in the future. Okay, so Just another reminder, we have a chat, Q&A. If you have any questions, leave them as we go along, and I will check them at the end. I think this, what we're talking here in the context of Supernova, it is important to understand how our ecosystem works and how our platform is structured, and this will help you set the tone of what are the limitations and possibilities within Supernova. I left you here a glossary about how I'm going to say some terms that are more of our platform, and if you have any doubts, you can always refer to here to understand what I mean by certain terms as I speak. Okay, so at the base level, Supernova's ecosystem is constituted by a workspace, and the workspace is where your team members live. So we have the design system, the people that work in the design system, which are the editors. And then we have the team that consumes the design system, and these are the viewers, and they consume the documentation. And within a workspace, we have what we call a design system. But you'll see, we call it design system, but it's not necessarily in a vacuum, as I'll see was one setup, one of the setup types further. But what we mean by a design system is where your design system elements will live. And these are your assets, your tokens, and your components. And you can, with this design system data, you can create one documentation per design system, and you can create multiple pipelines of the code export of many different languages of, in this case, assets and tokens, not components, but assets and tokens. Okay, so this is the base of the setup of Supernova, and usually a design system that serves a singular brand is set up this way. But we enable you to set up in a multi-brand scenario in these three types of ways. The first one is type A, which is we've been seeing a trend that has emerged, like I said, with the use of Figma modes. Teams have been setting up multi-brand design systems more and more this way, utilizing brands as a theme. And they document everything together, and then they export to code and utilize usually frameworks like Style Dictionary to serve the different brands because they are themes. Themes in Supernova, by the way, are essentially what we call, they're what we translate when we read data from Figma. We have a Figma variables plugin, and we read the modes and translate them into themes. Just for, I don't know if there's people that don't use Supernova yet. Okay, so the second type is utilizing, we have a brand feature that I will show you how to set up in a bit. And what this essentially does is it creates a copy within the same design, not a copy, sorry. Within your one design system, it creates a parallel of your design data. So essentially you can have a duplicate of design system data. And in the example that I talked about for the teams that have, for example, this was very common before the variables came. There are teams that have a separate design styles and tokens and components for each of the brands. And usually this is an ideal setup. Or even if you utilize this setup, this could be interesting if you have a big team and you need a bigger separation of concerns. You can create this, and this is a good way for the editors to organize themselves and collaborate, but it doesn't influence the end consumer because your design system consumers from the multiple brands will be still consuming through one documentation. And the last type that you can set up with Supernova is, like I said, the workspace is where your team lives, and we allow you to create multiple design systems within one workspace. And each design system would represent an individual brand. And we allow you to connect these documentation websites with something that is called multi-design system navigation. And we do URL matching, so your teams can associate everything to one design system, but you can separate each brand, and each website can be styled individually to the branding of each of the brands, for example. This, I want to preface that Supernova is an extremely scalable platform. And even if you start with any of these setups, you can always evolve to setup type C, for example. And if, for example, your company is quite big and it acquires different brands that you need for any reason to separate in your design system, you can evolve to this possibility. Okay, so now the practical part. Remember these questions I showed you here? I tried to create, let's say, a choose your own adventure type of template that I'm going to demonstrate with you, but then I'm going to ask you to, if you want to practice this with your team, when we share this with you, can utilize the blank example, and you can duplicate the file. It will be in Figma, Supernova's Figma community profile. Okay, so these areas that I talked to you here, I think after you answer these questions with your team, you'll have enough information to play this little game, let's say, of how to set up your design system with Supernova and which one would be the best option for you. I'll explain how this file is structured. So here you could, I envision you putting a screenshot of your Figma files. And even if you have one for components and tokens, they are separate, you could put them here as a base. And then ideally, this would be how you would map your Figma library setup. So let's say I have tokens for all of these brands. I can utilize, for example, I know in Supernova it is important to distinguish between Figma library files or a Figma file. These are a bit nuanced, but I think we also have the ability to read Figma variables. And like I said, you have the access to Token Studio, but let's say you have styles for this brand and you utilize Figma variables for all of these. You could utilize these little tags to illustrate this together with your team. And then going forward with how you have your components structured, this will depend on each the teams individually. I'm just showing you how you could set things up, but I will show you an example of each of the design systems further. Okay, so let's say you laid out the foundation with your design team, how you have things structured or how you plan to have things structured. Now, by the way, before I continue, I added also a few Figma tips of how you could do certain setups for a multi-brand setup. This is a small tip, but I would advise you to look at how to create composable components or slots and watch these Figma files. They're very interesting. And in our experience and from asking tips from our customers, this helps a lot to help your team members have a way of creating compositions in Figma without having to detach the components. Okay, so continuing. You established your Figma library file setup. And are you, in this case, this is important because if you're utilizing themes for brands, this will influence the way you set up. and you can answer further if you're not. If you have separate Figma library files, or if you're utilizing Token Studio, we advise you to go with setup type B, which you can see it's this type of setup. And if not, you can ask yourself if you want to have one documentation website per each brand. If so, we would advise you to go with design system type C, which would be the one that has the multiple design system documentations per brand. And the last one is the design system type A, which would be utilizing the Supernova Figma variable sync plugin to connect your modes, which will be your themes, and you can document them accordingly to Supernova. And here you can also lay out how you would distribute your design system data files within Supernova. So you could utilize your Figma files and decide how you will distribute them. This will make more sense when I show you the platform. And I think it's time for showing you the design system options. You have an example documentation per each one, and the pros and cons of each. I've laid them out for you, but I will show you how they look. So let's look firstly at design system type A, which would be the one utilizing the Supernova's plugin with Figma variables. And so jumping to Supernova now, you can see my screen still, I hope. I think so. If not, tell me in the chat. So this would be an example of a design system setup for type A. So if we go to our design tokens, I have here my tokens, and I have, oh, thank you so much, Curtis. We have modes divided by brands. And what I've done as well is an example of how I have the component set up. This could be a nice tip. For example, if you have a design file per each of the components, you could come here and create a custom property of the type Figma component, and you could lay out your different brand files, and also, for example, track the status for each one individual as a row, and showcase them in your documentation in a very easy way through our block that is called the component overview table. And you can see your design system, consumers can see all of these together. It could be an easy, quick way of documenting all your different Figma libraries. And also, for example, you could utilize our page tabs per each of the brands when you're documenting your tokens. Just a second. And in this case, because you are utilizing themes, we advise you to go here and let's say, let's pretend I'm not in Mercury. I'll show you Mercury. Wait a minute. So in this case, I added my design token block, and I chose the Mercury theme as I added with the to the themes. And I chose the option, instead of a splitting view, I chose the option of overriding the base. And this way I can showcase only the tokens for this particular brand. And if we see the documentation, this is the classic documentation setup. This is how your team would see it. And as I showed you, they would see a theme for each of the brands. And then in the components, they could see a component overview table for each of the brands as well. And the team can click here and open the individual Figma file you linked for each of the components. This is a very quick option to quickly set up a multi-brand type A. All of these tips I'm giving you, they're also here, so no worries. If you don't need to memorize everything, I'm going to overload you with information. And the pros and cons of this setup is here. There are some, I think it boils down of what you want to achieve as your as a team, and also the questions you answered here will heavily determine the setup that is best for you. Moving on to, I'm gonna not go to design system type C yet. I'm gonna go to type B first. So this design system setup is the one where we enable the brand functionality of Supernova. And how this looks is, so like I said in the beginning, creating a brand essentially is creating another layer or another parallel of your design system data. And how you set this up is you need to go to the settings, to brands, and you need to enable the multi-brand and create a brand for each one of your brands. And this drop-down will show here. And this will be reflected especially in your design tokens. For example, I'm in brand Jupiter, but if I switch to Mercury, it will have a completely different token set, and Saturn the same. And if you see in your design system data, I have a different file for each of the brands, and this is how I added them. And also in your components, remember we saw a column with each of the components. In this case, I would have a completely different component column, component table for each of the brands. I also mentioned earlier that this doesn't necessarily reflect on your design and design system consumer, because the way the documentation will be shown is you can achieve exactly the same result as the design system type A. But for you as an editor, it will essentially be will create another layer to your design system data. So if you go, for example, for in your assets block, if you add an asset block and you change the selection, you can see here a drop down. For example, I'm seeing the Saturn design system elements here, but if I want to check the Mercury ones, I would change here. This usually is an interesting setup when there's bigger teams. And like I said, if you need a bigger or a different type of organization of your data, this is the way to go. And also because in this case, this was when we had the majority of teams weren't using modes as, oh, I'm lost, wait, I'm here. Because the majority of teams there weren't any modes, and we have teams that had completely different files for each of the brands. This was the way we found that could serve these teams. Okay. So the last design system type is the design system type C, which is the one that has like I said, it's the more scalable and complex one, but I want to also pardon, I want for you to take into consideration that this means you need to have a separate design system documentation for each of the brands. And this means if you're a smaller team, you would need to consider the overhead of keeping up with 2 documentation websites, or 3 or 5, depending on how many brands your company has. And how this looks in Supernova is essentially like you see, for example, we were in design system type A and type B as an example, but in this case, design system type C would be the one with multiple design system documentation per brand. And this design system is feeding on these 3 brands. And how you enable this is they are completely different design systems with completely different data sets. But you can, like I mentioned, unify them through the documentation. And how you do this is you go to your documentation settings and you go to advanced and go to the option of multi-design system navigation. If you enable this, you will be able to select each of the brands you want your documentation to connect to. And you need to do this per documentation, in every documentation of each one of the brands, and then you need to hit publish for this to be enabled. And how this looks is, like I said, design system type C. I have this drop down in the header, and I can navigate to different design system documentations. In this case is Jupiter or Mercury. And you can document each of the brands individually. And a good thing is that they will be always unified by this header, so your team can always refer back to them. And we do URL matching. So these documentations share a URL. And let's say you have a design system consumer that is in the context of typography. If they switch to Saturn, and Saturn has also a typography context, this will keep it for your user, and this is a good way to improve their usability with Supernova. Okay, so like I said, these tips are all here, the ones that I shared. And also you'll be able, if you want to click here, to see the final documentation. And these examples are all public, you can check them out. And also to recap, how to set each of these types up is here on this blue square, and you can check our documentation, learn more documentation of Supernova to learn how things work more in depth. Okay, let me just sip of water a minute. You are very quiet. You can say hello in the chat. Tell me if you're enjoying, or if is it sunny where you are? Thank you, Luis. Hello. Awesome. Thank you for being here live with us. Okay, so thank you. So after all of this information that I shared with you, I'm also gonna give you another next steps of how you can take this even further and help you set things up, make you feel more confident at how you could set things up. And so remember those little dots and questions you answered above. We can proceed with the answers, and they will help you decide better. And I would advise you, and also from our experience of some doubts that some of our customers have shown, is after they know how things can be set up with Supernova and Figma and a little bit of how they could think about code itself, I think it's time to map out at a very bird's eye view these areas. So essentially, for the brands you have, what products are they serving? What product areas are there any other product areas that your teams are divided into, for example? If so, what platforms do they serve? What are the design system assets that these teams should share or not? And I put here a few examples. For example, if there's any NPM packages, or if there's a common storybook that your engineers are currently using, you could lay them out here. And also, last but not least, how the teams are divided and who would be the consumers of the design system. We learned from some of our customers that, for example, they have design system teams for brands, and they have different engineers, and some of the engineers are shared across the brands, and also that they have other people that need to consume the design system, like QA or product managers, and also we learned that there's people, customers, and I think that's a great thing, that have also the brand team that is part of the design system initiative and also needs to be part not only from the consumer side, but also from the editor and the team side. And all of these questions, I think, will help you better map out how you could set your things up with Supernova. And after this, after all of this, the last part would be, I only have it here because it's an example that you can use. I think it's time to jump to documentation information architecture. And depending on all of the information you laid out here, maybe deciding how you could set things up and how you could organize things for your audience. I'm gonna just this is a bit too, might be basic for people that utilize Supernova, but how our information architecture is structured. So we have the design system, right? And then we have something that we call groups inside of Supernova. Maybe let me show you type A, that is clearer to perceive. So we have these little groups, and you can add a new group. And essentially, a group is a navigation menu, let's say. And inside of each of the groups, you can have pages, and inside of the pages, you can have page tabs. And these are here. And you can also set up the design system navigation type. You can only have a sidebar, or you can have a top and sidebar, and this will give you another layer of hierarchy of your documentation. And these things you can always consider when deciding how you want to structure your documentation. And one last thing I want to share that is a block that is, I think, the most popular and the most loved, which is the tabs block. This block really helps the team structure their design system data, and especially in the context of multi-brand, you can separate each of the audiences. For example, if you want to document all your brands together, and don't forget that each of the blocks come with different layouts that you can change and make your documentation even more interesting for your end users. And one last tip that I heard from a client of ours that is doing multi-brand is that I don't think I have, yes. So I don't have this example, but he shared with us that they use this side navigation also as a way to create separation of concerns for their consumers and consumers of the documentation. And they also, in some pages, utilize this as like, hey, brand X, come here and read this specific thing. And how we do this is we read your headers, and we create a side navigation, and you can also link individually to these headers through the documentation, just throwing some tips. And I think that is it. Yes, let me know if you have any questions. I think we could prep for the Q&A. Did you leave any questions? I don't find the, wait a minute. Oh, okay. No, I saw there's one question in the chat. Are you adding any questions here? Cool. I'm just sipping some water. You can, thank you. Leave chat in the chat and say hi. I saw someone said it's night and very hot. It's sunny here where I am. Okay, so I think I'm gonna add there's a question in the chat. Oh, not this. Let me copy and paste it. Oops. Okay, first of all, no worries about noob questions. We're all noobs and always learning. Uh, uh, Okay, so the question is, sorry, new question. What is themes? We use Token Studio and it has themes too. They are converted to modes when we sync it to Figma variables. Okay, so this is a complex topic. We have a lot of materials that could complement your question. But I really quickly, so themes are, let me open Figma maybe. I don't understand really the question. Let me see if you mean themes inside of Supernova or themes in general? If you could tell me, I didn't get your name. Sorry, anonymous. Could you break down your question a little further so I can answer better instead of guessing? But we'll get to there. And if not, I'll answer with some complementary materials at the end when we share the recording. Okay. Guilherme asked, we have all our tokens from Token Studio and we have a default brand theme plus other two brand themes that will override to show their look and feel. And I need to set up Supernova for only one brand and the another ones for as themes. Good question. I think, Guilherme, if I'm not mistaken, but are you using Supernova, correct? Can you tell me in the chat if you're still here? Yes. Okay, cool. So let me see if I understand properly. I think if I'm not mistaken, I can also add this as a resource. In Token Studio connection, you are able, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but you are able to map out how you want your Token Studio to be, sorry. You can, if you read the setup guide, you can set up Token Studio in a way that you can determine how you want to map out to the different brands. I can also follow up on this, see if you can set up as a Supernova brand. And you can, so essentially this would be the design system setup type B using the brand feature. But I'm not sure if you're having any trouble connecting or trying to do this integration. But let me know. I'm also in the Supernova Slack friends if you want to reach out to me, and I can follow up with this as well with you. Okay. Thank you, Guilherme. Please follow up with me and I'll try to check. Okay, so another question from George. Is there a massive way to bring all the components from the design system into Figma? Good question. There is, I'm assuming you're asking, George, I'm not sure if you're using Supernova or not. You can also answer me, but if you could bring them to the, you mean to the table? If I'm gonna, you can connect your components, just, I'm not sure what is your level of expertise with Supernova, but essentially you can have a published Figma library with your components, you paste the URL here, and then you can, one way you can enable your component import is through editing the scopes of each of the files. So if, actually, okay, I'm mistaken. Components are brought by default, so components and frames, so this would bring them up. And if you're asking for the massive way, as in a quicker way, I'm assuming you mean for this table, not at the moment. At the moment, it needs to be added individually. So you need to come here and essentially select your component individually here. It is something we are considering to add in the future, but we don't have any, I don't have any dates to share with you when that's going to come. What I can say is I also added here a possible, we have a Supernova request a feature. You can always ask for this as a feature. It always helps us decide what's coming next in the roadmap. It's also there, you can check it out. This is the, oh, thank you. Ezequiel, what is themes? We use Token Studio and has themes too. It was the first question. So Ezequiel said, related to the themes question, there is a fork in the design decision that asks, using themes for brands. What are themes are you referring to? Okay. So what I'm referring to, good, maybe, yeah, that's a good question. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. So I'm essentially referring to modes. So maybe I should rephrase that. Thank you for the feedback. So what I'm saying is this the file? So essentially what I mean is, are utilizing modes. So if you're, let's say this is a multi-brand design system and each of these themes represent a brand. So they are modes in Figma, but in Supernova, they will be converted into themes. So if this is your design system setup or an example of this, the token architecture you have is relying heavily on themes or modes to represent each of the brands. You can, I know you're not using Supernova, so I'll show you how you could connect this really quickly. So let's say you have your modes in your file. If you come here to the plugin section and search Supernova Figma variable sync plugin, you are able to, you need to have a Supernova account. And once you have a Supernova account, you can check here the workspace. And then you can choose the design system you want, depending on the number of design systems you have in your workspace. It will show you here, and you can choose where you want to push these modes to. And we allow you, I don't have any empty one here, but you will be able to select each of the collections you want to push. And if there are any collections that have aliases, in this case, my semantic collection is feeding from the base collection, we will mandatory pass the base collection because we keep the aliasing. So you would select these and push the changes to Supernova. And this would essentially translate to inside of Supernova, will show up as you see here in your design tokens. They are the same modes you have in Figma, but in Supernova, we call them themes. But I see how this can be confusing, so I might adapt the text to say, are you utilizing modes? And if yes, do this way. Okay, thanks. Now, the question from Klaus. Any recommendations to structuring your Figma documents when using them as sources? Thinking of limitations when scaling brands in the future. Good question. So I think there's a few questions that come up in my head. So it depends on how you. So okay, so I think for answering your question of how the scalability aspect, I think it has to do with how you want your teams to consume them as design system as Figma, as your designers in Figma, sorry. So one recommendation that I could give you, if for you it's easier for you to manage to have all the brands under one design system, definitely organizing, utilizing the pages. We see this as a very common practice amongst our customers. So like using this as each component will be in a certain page. This is definitely something that is very common practice. I know I don't know if you're utilizing modes. If you are, it is harder for the teams to see them in action. So having something on the side, like you see here, a little, what we could call it, playground, where you have a frame with the modes applied. And so if your team needs to like consult something really quickly in your Figma documentation, they can come here and switch between the brands and check how things are applied depending on the context they want, and they can just utilize this playground. This is also some trend we've seen teams doing. Something else that I shared also above, but this would apply more in the case if you have separate Figma files for each of the brands, is using this technique of defining a background color for each of the components. And then when your team is searching, they can figure out to which brand it belongs to. If you document this somewhere, this could help them navigate as well. And I think at the top of my head, these are the most common things, I think. And honestly, to answer this better, I think it depends on how you have, firstly, if you utilize modes, and like I showed you, and then if not, maybe have them separated into each brand. It also depends on, like I said, who's consuming it and in what context of Figma. Okay, do we have any more questions? You do? Curtis, tell me. Where is it? Okay, cool. This was so helpful. Is it possible to have working examples of components also with code preview? Huh. I can try, but I'll see what I can do. So can you explain a little bit more? Do you mean how you apply the code example of the themes and modes? Can you give me more context? Cool. Also, I don't know if you're in Supernova Friends Slack. You can also Slack me about this. Of course, we can take this further. But I will check what you mean. So I don't know. I know for the people that don't use Supernova, I believe what Curtis is referring to is this block we have. Correct me if I'm wrong. Or no. Wait, sorry, not this one. This one? And if we could see the example of the multi-brand applied to this. Okay, I need to dig further, but we just, so for the team members that don't use Supernova, we have this code block. I can also bring it to the backlog of enablement that we can bring to you guys. But we have this edit React code block that we allow you to, let's say this only works with React, and you have NPM libraries with your design system components. We allow you to add them here as dependencies. And then we allow you essentially to add them here as code snippets, and we have a we render them live. And what this means for your consumers is when it's published, they can interact with the code, copy the code snippets and see how it behaves. But I think, yeah, it's kind of a playground. Yes, it's a sandbox. So we can all definitely create more enablement material around this, and I'll see if we have anything about this that I could share. And that's it. I think we're on time. Thank you so much for participating. This was fun. And I hope you enjoyed. And again, I'm in Slack. Share with me any questions, or if there's any follow-up questions you have about this. We will share with you the recording and definitely the file so you can utilize the template and use it with your team. And thank you so much. And I hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of your day. Nice to see you. Thank you. Bye.